How to motivate Peter the Plodder. Now, Peter technically isn't really doing anything too wrong. He's coming into work on time, he's probably quite friendly and outgoing, but he just kind of ticks all the minimum requirement boxes. His energy is low, he's a bit uninspiring, perhaps he's more on the side of Eeyore, i.e. his glass is half empty and there's nothing really interesting filling his cup right now. Perhaps Peter's been in his role for a long time, many years. He knows how to do it inside out. He also knows how to do just the minimum amount so that he can get by. Perhaps he admits to you that he's a bit bored in his role and you present him with some options around what he could be doing, what he could be looking at. However, every time he comes back with a reason why he can't fulfill that, do this, apply for that, and just doesn't really lift himself out of that low energy. You might be thinking, well, what's wrong with Peter? He turns up on time, he's friendly, people like him, he does the basics of what's required in his job. What's the big deal? Well, if Peter's working remotely perhaps on his own and he's getting the job done and that's all you really require, then perhaps you should move on to my video on Disruptive Diane. But for the rest of you that want to get a bit more out of Peter, stay tuned. Now, if Peter's part of a bigger team and they work together and others observe Peter coming in on time, but doing the bare minimum of what needs to be done, perhaps Peter walks around and talks to a lot of people and engages everybody and has a lot of chit chat, your team will notice and they will reflect on this and they will be thinking, well, if Peter's walking around all day talking to everybody and he can just do the basics and no one's complaining, I'm not going to bust a gut and try and do more. Or perhaps Peter's walking around in his Eeyore state and bringing a bit of a low energy vibe to the office as he distracts himself with meaningless chit chat. That energy's not very good for the team either. It may even make others feel a bit uncomfortable about standing out and being a wee bit more motivated about their job. Now, whether it's a colleague, a friend, Peter, or in fact yourself, at times we all need a bit of a push to motivate ourselves. And it's essential to understand that as a leader, everybody requires a different way of being pushed to get an outcome. Some will thrive on a challenge, others need a more laid-back approach. Regardless of where somebody falls on that spectrum, there's always a way to ignite their passion and really drive Peter for more success. The first step to motivating someone like Peter to do a little bit more is to actually really understand where Peter's coming from. This is about taking the time to have a conversation around what is motivating Peter. What gets Peter up in the morning to work? What is meaning that Peter's turning down opportunities to do a little bit more or to do some more development work? Is it lack of motivation or is it a lack of interest? Is it that those things really don't interest Peter and he has absolutely no desire to take them on? Is it that Peter's feeling a little bit undervalued? Has Peter been working here for 15 years and feels that actually no one's really appreciated all the work that I've done previously and I'm just going to kick back a little bit? Understanding Peter's perspective is the first step in trying to uncover how you're going to pull him out of this plotting stage. So I'd sit Peter down and have a chat and see if you can uncover what is motivating Peter and what is demotivating Peter. Now, I may have encountered a Peter or two in my 17 years of leadership, and I know for one in particular, which we'll call Peter 1.0, that we had several conversations about what he valued at work, what he wanted to strive to achieve. But what eventually broke the back of trying to break through Peter's steadfast resilience on holding on to the idea that the minimum was okay was one day when I sat him down and asked him the question of, so Peter, tell me what your work life looks like in a decade. And does it look like what you thought it would look like when you were a kid? This was a bit left field for Peter 1.0. He wasn't much of a deep thinker, but it was enough to make him stumble a bit he usually had something to say about anything. And he kind of stopped a bit and had a bit of a think about what I'd said. I mean, there's nothing like thinking into a decade to really make you think about whether you want to be in the same place as you are right now. And that was certainly the case for Peter 1.0. I could tell just from the look on his face that it made him very uncomfortable, and there was something about the idea that he'd still be here in 10 years that meant that he really did probably need something to change. Now, there are many other components to Peter 1.0 that resulted in him eventually shifting into a new job. But let's stick with our Peter and move on to step 2. Step 2 is about setting some clear expectations and goals for Peter. This is where you're really building on the basic level of minimal participation that Peter may be providing, and each week giving him one more thing or one more task or one more little part of a project to complete. So gradually building on what he's producing or what he's participating in, so that eventually, a couple of months down the line, Peter's actually operating at a pretty good capacity. Now, I would start with weekly blocks. I'd break it right down. What's the thing that I actually want him to get to? So I'd look at that and I'd say, okay, I actually need Peter to take on 2 projects. I can't have him just running with one project all the time. In order for him to take responsibility for 2 whole projects, I'll need to break that down to, okay, here's his baseline 1 project. So each week I'm going to add another component of a second project, till eventually, by the end of 2 months, Peter's actually taken on the whole of the second project and has got ownership over it. These goals should be achievable enough for Peter so that it doesn't completely overwhelm him and turn into a bit of a standstill, but maybe cut down on those hourly walkarounds that he's having with the office. This should, at a minimum, let's pretend we're Peter, push him up to the status where he's achieving the full capacity of the job as a minimum outcome after 2 months. Peter's actually fulfilling all the components of the job satisfactorily, and we're good. Hopefully though, after a period of building on Peter's capacity and getting him to achieve more each week, it actually turns into something more than that, and Peter starts to feel like he's contributing and values his contributions and enjoyed the challenge. Even if he isn't, you've achieved him doing more work. Great job. But let's move on to step 3. Step 3 is that feedback loop for Peter. So you might have been doing the basics to get by, and you might not feel like the extra is worthy of some big celebration. However, you need to acknowledge that he's doing more than he's ever done before. So even if it is just a little bit, it's really important that you feed back to Peter how pleased you are with his additional work. I also think it's really important to do it in a team setting. So all of his colleagues that have enjoyed Peter's chit-chat for the last year as he wanders around the office can actually hear that, oh, Peter's actually participating in 2 projects now. Interesting. Maybe I need to keep pushing with my workload. That's the theory anyway, and it's surprising how well it works. Step 4 depends on how Peter's really shaping up in terms of his progress. But where you really want to get to with Peter is that you can have a really great professional development conversation about what's next. So this is going back to that step 1 with Peter where you talked about his motivations for work. I'd readdress those now. Now that Peter's had 2 months where he's actually operating at a good level and you're happy with what he's doing and you've been giving him consistent feedback and his colleagues and peers are raving about how great Peter is now, then now you can look at him and go, okay, this is amazing. How are you feeling? What's motivating you now? This will need to be after a consistent period of performance from Peter. You can't do it in the first couple of weeks because it will just overwhelm Peter and poor Peter will be back to his plodding self before you can blink. So don't rush it. So you want to have a really good plan around, okay, what could be some options that Peter might be interested in. So before you actually go into that conversation with Peter, I'll be thinking about what you've seen from him. What did you see him really engaging in? Where do you think that could lead? Is there some other skill set that he looks like he's getting interested in that he could pick up a little bit more training on? Could you encourage that? I would come armed with dates, with actual concrete courses, with options, so that it's harder for Peter to say, oh, I'll go away and I'll have a look into that, and then come up with an excuse. You've got to try and lock him down. And if you have picked up on areas where Peter is more interested, then hopefully he's going to be more open to the idea of doing more in that space. Because let's face it, if we're interested in what we're doing at work, we're going to be more engaged and more likely to continue with it and want to build on it. Let's hope it works too for Plodding Peter. Step 5 is actually about you. So this is about you showing up and holding yourself accountable for the same level of expectations that you're putting on Plodding Peter. So you'll need to be demonstrating your own enthusiasm for work, your own ability to go a bit above and beyond, your own positive attitude and ability to juggle multiple projects. Because we all know that actions speak louder than words. So Peter may need somebody like you to really showcase how good it can be when you move beyond Plodding Peter. Now, if you have a talkative Tim that you need to talk less, why don't you go into my next video and I'll give you some strategies on talkative Tim too. Thanks for watching.